Today on CityCast Denver, one of Denver's most influential representatives at the state capitol resigned last month, just 1 week after being reelected, which cast new light on his dedication to public service, but also on the secretive process our government uses to fill vacant seats at the state legislature. Our newest politics correspondent, Deep Singh Badesha, joined me earlier this week to moderate a debate for the candidates to replace Chris Hansen, and he's on with me today to break down that race and talk about how undemocratic this process really is. Today is Thursday, December 19th. I'm Paul Caroli, and here's what Denver's talking about. Deep Singh Badesha, welcome back to CityCast Denver.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here again.
Yeah, I mean, you and I saw each other less than 12 hours ago, I think, at this vacancy committee debate.
Yes, we're just now leaving the North Pole Sendo's workshop. Now we're back here in our studio to chat about it.
I hope the listeners appreciate that I've been wearing the Santa hat all week. I know they can't see it, but I'm feeling it. Well, thanks to everyone who came out last night. I had a great time. I was so excited for the turnout. The fact that so many people came out to see this process, it showed me that I think we were right, that this previously very secretive process, people wanted to see how it worked and what it looks like, this vacancy committee process. But let's start with how we got here. And I think we have to start with Chris Hansen. Deep. Can you catch us up on like the backstory of where we're at with this specific vacancy committee?
Yes. So Senator Chris Hansen, not the same as the Chris Hansen that many people might know from TV. Senator Chris Hansen was previously a state representative, then became a state senator from Denver representing Senate District 31. He was quite an influential and powerful state senator. He was positioned on the Joint Budget Committee. He was a leader on a lot of climate change bills. And in particular, he was one of the main brokers for the property tax deals that Coloradoans saw earlier this year. He unexpectedly resigned right after winning the election. So election was like November 5th. He won by a huge margin. Tens of thousands of folks voted for him in his district. And then first, Colorado Politics and a couple other sites leaked it first that like, hey, he's going to resign.
Like less than a week later. It was like whiplash. Like he just gets reelected. He's this popular, powerful senator from Denver. It's an important seat, as you've told me many times. And then he resigns to take this high-paying job in Durango, working for some electricity co-op or something.
Yes, with an alleged salary anywhere from $450,000 to like $600,000. So he's going to be making $500,000 to live in Durango. So I don't blame him. I think it is probably the right move for him and his family. It totally makes sense. But, this added to this chorus that you saw a lot from a lot of Democrats that, this doesn't feel like democracy, that like a small vacancy committee now is going to choose a replacement for maybe up to 8 years in this pretty significant seat instead of having an open primary. So it opened up a lot of backlash and it opened up a lot of interest. So now we have at least 7 people so far that have announced for the seat. Yeah.
So that was one thing that was interesting to me last night because I didn't know like how you even declared or how you even got involved in a race like this. Like, how did these candidates become candidates? Someone told me that all you had to do to be a candidate for this seat was email the head of the Democratic Party and just say, I want to be a candidate. And that was it. And then you got to be part of it. Is that right? Do you know that that's true?
That is absolutely true. So essentially all you do is...
That's crazy.
It's like The Office, right? Where you can just declare bankruptcy. You're like, I declare bankruptcy. Here you can just literally say, I declare candidacy, and then you become a candidate.
And then you just have to convince like 50 people of the 110-person committee, and you're in the state Senate.
There you go. That's how it works. Yeah, so, Denver in particular seems like they're taking it much more seriously than other vacancy committees, right? We've seen vacancy committees up from Adams County that had like 15 people on it or 12 people. Manny Rundell, great representative. He was originally elected by a vacancy committee, and I think his votes were maybe in the dozens. Julianne Marvin and Jacqueline Phillips, who later ran a primary against each other. I think Julianne Marvin won that vacancy by 1 vote. It was an 8-7 margin. There was only 15 people or so in that vacancy committee. So, other counties have much smaller vacancy committees. Denver, because we have so many Democrats here, so many people are involved. And like I was saying, these are pretty influential positions. Mm-hmm. More people become party officers. We've been joking around this week that this is a smoke-filled back room or a secretive, shadowy deal. And the reason why it feels that way is that the people who get to vote in these are officers of the Democratic Party, namely precinct organizers. So these people, Denver's divided into like 400 or 500 different precincts. Each precinct organizer roughly probably represents like 1,500 people or so. And during a typical Democratic year, they'll go around, they'll meet other Democrats in their neighborhood, they'll drop off signs, they'll try to do fundraising. And they're really like the ground level of the Democratic Party, right? Like Harry Truman, when he first started off as a Democrat, started as a precinct organizer. And moved from precinct organizer all the way up, right? It's a very starter local position. So these people really care about this stuff.
That's so interesting. So this is not their main job, is just waiting around to be called on, to be tapped, to be on a vacancy committee. They have this other role.
Yes, correct. I mean, the youngest person on the vacancy committee I saw was 21, and the oldest person was 92.
Wow.
And I would say there are far left people who love Bernie Sanders and AOC, and there's far right people, not far right people, but as far as Democrats go, who are more centrist in the camp, who like think Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema were doing good jobs as senators. So it's a very wide swath of people who become precinct organizers.
You talk to a lot of these people. Have they been thinking about it differently than maybe in the past? Like, is there anything different now that Chris Hansen's like quick turnaround has put this whole process into the spotlight? Are people thinking about it differently, or is it playing out differently? Tell me about how the voters are thinking about it.
I think because of all the media attention that's particularly come onto this seat, and because of the timing of this, I think it's entered a different type of sense of responsibility for these vacancy voters. I had previously been pretty involved and was tracking a vacancy committee that happened last year between Chad Clifford and Ashish Vaidya. And that was for a representative that was resigning in Centennial. Came down to a handful of votes, but when people were, talking about them, they were really just talking about like, oh, Chad and Ashish and who do I think is going to be more aligned with me, right? It seemed like a lot more personal for those vacancy voters. Here, we had a lot of vacancy voters actually at the debate. I think we had about probably half the committee there, but probably like 40 or 50 people were there. And, one of the vacancy members turns to his neighbors and says, hey, are you vacancy members? And they're like, no, we just live in the district. And he's like, hey, I want to talk to more people because I feel responsible for this. Like I have 1,500 to 2,000 people I represent. Who do you think I should vote for? And I don't think I've ever seen that before. I don't think I've seen vacancy members ask their neighbors, ask their building members, ask other people who live in Senate District, hey, who do you think I should be considering for this? So I think, Senate District 31 sounds like they've stepped up a little bit. They feel the pressure from the media. They feel the pressure from the public. Be like, hey, you should take this job much more seriously than just choosing a friend.
You know what I say to that, Deep? Good. That's fascinating, too, though, that they're aware that this, there might have been something wrong here all along. But maybe it's like, now's the time that we could see some reforms. Has anyone been talking about reforms? I know we've been pitching ideas on the podcast, but have you heard anyone with some real influence talk about this?
Yeah, for sure. One of the representatives, Bob Marshall from Douglas County, Highlands Ranch area, he is probably one of the most moderate Democrats that there is. He sometimes will vote with Republicans, sometimes will vote with Democrats. He is a Democrat, though. He pushed a bill last year that was going to reform the process. This year, he's going to push that again. There's been a lot of talk from both parties. As you know, Kent Theory has thought about reforming the vacancy process as well. So there's a lot of discussion there.
I'm interested in Kent Theory's idea because our producer, Olivia, when we were talking about this, she pitched, ranked choice voting would seem to have an answer for this because we've already ranked candidates as voters and the first place person decides they don't want the seat anymore. Maybe it could just go to whoever was the second preference of the most voters. Just keep going down the list. I kind of like that idea. Was that what Kent was proposing?
No, so I think, there was a whole suite of election reforms that Kent Theory was pushing this last time around.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the particulars about the vacancy thing he was looking at. I think they were looking at special elections, right. And that's actually how many states do it. So Colorado is one of 5 states that does it this way, that's appointed by a vacancy committee. Other representatives and senators, when they resign, are either through a vacancy election or appointment of local officials. So that's another process that folks have talked about is instead of the Democratic Party organizers appointing this position, essentially what happened, it would be the Democratic leaders of that area appoint. So that would be like Denver City Council gets to appoint the next state senator. And I don't think that's the direction in which the public wants to move. I think the public does want to move in this more special election direction.
Yeah, more democracy. More voters, more people involved. Interesting. I mean, I guess I could see arguments both ways. I mean, the knock on the special election is that it's expensive. I think that's the beat I've always heard. So if you just have like Mayor Johnston saying, okay, this person will be the next state senator, and maybe it's not as many people represented, but at least it's cheap.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting? I think if it was an appointment process, Mike Johnson actually ran into this issue before where there's a RTD vacancy. And the RTD vacancy is actually appointed by the local executive. So Mayor Johnson appointed someone to the RTD vacancy. In particular, though, they wanted to appoint someone who wasn't going to run for that office again. Right? So you could find those scenarios more if you gave it an appointment process where like, hey, we're going to just appoint a lame duck to this. That way we can have a real election, the next general election.
Interesting. So that's actually a good segue because the person that Mike Johnston nominated for the RTD board was Jamie Lewis. And Jamie Lewis was at one point one of the people who was potentially a candidate for this State Senate District 31 vacancy, but not anymore. The candidates we actually did have. Let's talk about some of these and maybe some of the politics around like specifically the shady backroom deal that people were talking about was Hansen endorsing Representative-elect Sean Camacho, who was elected earlier this year and still hasn't served a seat in the legislature, but was elected to this lower house. And then also Hansen endorsed Katie March to fill Camacho's seat in the state house. I think that's the part that felt really shady to people. But tell me about some of the other candidates.
Yeah, there are a total of 7 candidates. Sean Camacho is one. There's another representative also jumping in, which is Representative Steve Woodrow. He has a unique position where he was also appointed by a vacancy committee previously filled by Hansen. So Lois Court had resigned. Chris Hansen moves her to the Senate through a vacancy committee. And then Steve Woodrow, running against, I think, 10 people at that time, came up on top to fill Chris Hansen's vacancy. So if Woodrow wins this seat again, he's basically just filling Hansen's vacancies as they come along.
Wild.
Other candidates we got is Matthew Ball. He is a former attorney that has served in the military and currently works for Mike Johnson at the city of Denver.
He was interesting to me last night. Matthew Ball. I did not know his name. I wasn't aware of him. I mean, honestly, all 7 of these candidates I thought were top notch. This was my main takeaway from the whole night. It's like we've been talking about how undemocratic this whole process was, but after this debate, I feel like all 7 of these people really brought their A game and knew the issues and really got it. And like, I don't know, it made me rethink like my critiques of this whole process, just the caliber of these candidates personally. But go on.
You know what? I think the most interesting thing is I was talking to vacancy committee members and they said, they're coming in with an open mind and that they might have a first or second preference, but they all know it's probably going to go to a second or third ballot. And because it's going to go to a second or third ballot, they're in particularly interested who they should support down the line, right? They're like, if my first vote doesn't get to the 50% mark, it's like a brokered convention, essentially, where we're like, okay, we need to vote again. We drop the lowest person, vote again. Drop the lowest person, vote again. And I think a lot of people there were to try to find out their second and third choices, just in case our first choice doesn't work out.
Interesting. So that might be relevant, especially for someone whose views are maybe on a little bit more of on the fringe side, like Iris Halpern. Would be nice to talk about next. You told me that she was an abolitionist, which led to an interesting moment last night. So the last 2 abolitionists at the state capitol were Tim Hernandez and Elizabeth Epps. They both lost their seats last year. I've heard that you hosted fundraisers for them in the past. What would you take from their experiences at the Capitol in how you approach their job as state senator?
I can't speak to how familiar I am with how they interacted with their colleagues at the legislature. That wasn't kind of what I was following. What I do know is that people should be thinking constructively about where our money is better spent than trying to address issues of potential crime at the tail end, right? And so there are many better ways for us to be spending our money to reduce crime and to reduce incarceration than waiting until kind of calling the police, which is a last resort, right? And depending on our prison systems. And I think everyone here, sitting here, is going to say, look, we should be funding, 10 seconds. We should be funding our schools. We should be funding kind of healthcare, and addiction recovery programs, et cetera, first. And so what I would learn from them is that you should be proud of the things that you care about, but I have my own approach to how I deal with things. People know me. I've been professional and a litigator my whole entire career here, and have worked closely with many people at the legislature already and have a good reputation there. So I think I'm a good person to carry those messages.
Okay, so here's what I wanted to talk about with that clip. She does something here that I learned about only recently from a colleague in the press who got some media training recently. And tell me if you picked up on this, Deep. But so I was asking her, like, how would the experiences of Hernandez and Epps inform the way you would approach those kinds of similar policies and the similar values that you shared with them? And she was like, I don't know if I can speak to their specific experiences, but here's what I can tell you. And that's the line that I learned from this person who got the media training. Here's what I can tell you. So I just wanted to flag that for the listener. Like, if you ever hear that again, that's someone who has got media training and is trying to not answer your question. Here's what I can tell you. And then just answer about whatever you want.
You know what's interesting? Last night, I wasn't sure if it was candidate training or lawyer speak. Representative-elect Camacho, Representative Woodrow, Matt Ball, and Iris Halpern are all four very successful attorneys, right? They weren't just attorneys who went to law school like me, who just kind of like do whatever. They're four very successful attorneys.
They're pros. There was pros on stage last night. Woodrow, we've talked about a little bit. I talked to some of the precinct organizers, the voters who are going to get to actually weigh in. It seemed to me like Woodrow's the favorite. That's what everyone was telling me, that Woodrow seems to have the most support. What do you think?
So I think the interesting thing about Representative Woodrow is, and he's in a very unique position, is, no one else has ran an election before except Sean Camacho. And even that election was a little bit interesting because I think it was an easier election because Elizabeth Epps wasn't really running a campaign. And he was really emphasizing that, right? Like, I've already done 5 sessions. You know exactly how I'm going to vote. Mm-hmm. You can listen to this moment from the debate last night where he kind of jokes that he's the most experienced candidate in the race, which I thought was interesting.
Representative Woodrow, recently you've used executive privilege to get out of a speeding ticket in which you were going 18 miles per hour. Also, along with me...
Sorry, 18 miles per hour over the limit.
Yes, 18 over the limit.
Accuracy is important.
Not too slow, yeah. I got to clarify that. Also, similar to me, you loved a website once known as Twitter, and you did get in some hot water with a controversial tweet seeming to celebrate the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Should voters be worried what you'll do with an even bigger platform and more power at the Capitol?
Thank you for the question. I actually deleted my X account in the aftermath of the assassination attempt, where I did say something very insensitive that I apologized for. My point, of course, was that a sympathetic Donald Trump was more likely to win the election, and that's bad for America. It's bad for all of us. But I certainly could have communicated that in a more effective manner. And I want to note that under the dome, I have a record of bipartisanship. I passed the ban against governmental NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, on a bipartisan basis. 48-hour bond hearings, which we got across, was done on a bipartisan basis. So I do have a track record of reaching across the aisle. In terms of the speeding ticket, I'll own that one. That was legislative privilege. I was trying to show an AP government student. We had a DPS bond hearing that day with UDeep and court in the morning. And the only thing on my docket was my own speeding ticket. And I had a conversation with the student ahead of time about how in America, it's still a country where you can go into court. It's not predetermined. You can argue your case to the judge. And if the law is on your side, you can win. I donated the $40 to Moms Against Drunk Driving. I think of all the scandals, I'm glad that you asked me about those two. Thank you. I think you did me a favor.
Yeah, so he is someone who's been in the media before. I'm not sure if that's going to actually cut against him, but it could. I wouldn't be surprised when the votes come out that he's the top vote getter. It'll be interesting, though, if it doesn't go to a second round. I would suspect it goes to a second round.
So you don't think he would get enough support in the first round to win it straight out?
Yeah, I suspect that he might be the top vote getter in the first round, but there might be some interesting shenanigans that happen. This has happened in past vacancies where someone gets 1, then 2, then 3 or 4 votes. Mm-hmm. The fourth person drops out, but the timing between the round 1 vote and the round 2 vote allows for people to move around the room, start negotiating, saying like, hey, actually, I'm going to support that person instead. That's when the really shadowy backroom happens. Like, you've probably heard about brokered conventions before, whether it's like the Republican National Convention or the Democratic National Convention, where you go to the national level and it's essentially a vacancy committee for president. And no one gets the top vote, then it's a brokered convention and everyone's trying to swing deals.
We should talk about Shanice Malouf and Monica Van Buskirk, I think, the two healthcare providers. What did you think about those two?
Yeah, so, healthcare has been in the news very recently because of the assassination of the United Healthcare CEO.
Right.
That's clearly brought up some rage and feelings from the public from all spectrum, right? I've never seen the left, the right, the center so united in saying like, healthcare is not working for me. Right. And in feeling the frustration. And I think that's caught a lot of media and folks off guard. So we asked actually last night, Monica, who's been a healthcare executive before, and Shanice, who's been a healthcare provider, about what their takes were on this issue.
Yeah, I liked Monica's take. It was interesting to me that this was how she chose to respond at the height of this moment of solidarity with the alleged killer and that. Anyway, listen to the clip.
Monica, you're one of two candidates up here today with experience in healthcare. So we're going to ask you about a conversation that's been happening all across the nation, which really revolved around the assassination of the United Healthcare CEO. There's been an outpouring of solidarity for the shooter. Has that changed the way you approach healthcare policy at the state level?
First of all, that was a real tragedy. There's no problem where the solution is to take someone else's life. Does it change my approach to the state? I think it gives urgency. I have heard from people, including some of you have heard this story. There was a mom I was talking to last year who was choking up describing her child's medical condition, not because the diagnosis couldn't be solved, but because she wasn't sure how she was going to afford the care her child needed. And so I've been hearing these stories throughout my career. I've helped make healthcare more affordable for hundreds of thousands of people in Colorado. I didn't realize how close to the surface that sorrow and that anger was at a societal level until I saw some of that response. So it doesn't change my approach. I come in a very pragmatic, data-driven way where I also include stories. But it does increase the urgency of this issue as we understand that cost, more than most costs, really impacts families.
I have to mention one other thing about Monica. Her shoes. Did you see her shoes?
Yep.
I think Monica gets the Best Dressed award for the SD31 vacancy debate last night. She had custom-made leather boots from a place I asked her about called Nix and Ness, which is a custom shoemaker. It's like a women-owned shoemaker. They put quotes from famous women on their shoes, but they also do custom jobs. And her shoes said, Monica Buskirk for Colorado, and then on the other shoe, State Senate District 31. And I think she got them custom made for this like month-long campaign. I thought they were great. I took a picture. We'll put that somewhere.
Talking about Monica's shoes, actually, these folks are preparing to run a full campaign in 2026. And that's because vacancy elections don't actually give the same incumbency advantage as running a normal primary does. So, Tim Hernandez was appointed through a vacancy committee. He lost narrowly in his primary election against Cecilia Espinoza. Julianne Marvin won her vacancy committee, but then she lost it against now Representative-elect Jacqueline Phillips up in Adams County. You saw Junie Joseph, who was appointed through a vacancy committee in Boulder, have a primary challenge as well. She was able to fend that off. But typically, you will see primary challenges, right? Even when Senator Hansen was elected to the Senate position, he had a pretty strong primary challenge against him too. So he had to raise a couple $100,000, do the door knocking, do all that. So these candidates are not going to be off the hook right away. If they have not solidified their base, they're probably going to get a pretty substantial challenger. And I could see the second or the third person here running against them in the primary.
Interesting. So it's conspicuous that she didn't choose to put 2025 on these shoes. We could see these shoes again in a couple of years.
We could see these shoes as a constant presence for the next 2 years across Senate District 31.
Why do you think that is, that you don't get the advantage? Is like the campaign itself the opportunity to build that relationship with voters? And if you don't do that, I guess I'm kind of talking myself into an argument here. Like, I feel like the campaign, yeah, you get to build a reputation through a campaign, raising money. And if you don't do that, then you don't have that relationship with voters. They don't know you when it's time to get reelected.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very small voting population, right? It's 110 people, and that's definitely not enough to actually capture the mood of what a House district or a Senate district actually might want. In particular, most people aren't following vacancy committees. Most people don't know who their state rep or state senator are.
Mm-hmm.
So when election time comes around, no one's going to really care that you were a state senator before. Maybe it'll carry a little bit of weight on your literature or your advertisements, but you're going to have to introduce yourself to the larger district anyways. And you might have a small head start, but it's not going to be as substantial.
Interesting. Is there anything else from the debate that stuck out to you, Deep?
You know, we asked one question for each person that we talked about what we could find online. We asked Chris Chiari in particular about why he was running for office, and he, talked about he's not in it for personal gain. These are the questions that are actually weighing heavily on voters now since Senator Hansen left. How do I know my senator is in it for me and not for themselves? And I don't think we would have seen these kind of answers in the forefront if it wasn't for the dynamic we're seeing.
Yeah. Interesting. I like that, though. I like that we're talking about it. And I like that it's affecting the politics in that way. And that was the most interesting stuff last night when we got people talking about the process itself, because it exposed this tension that everyone can see when they look at it about how this is supposed to be a democratic process, but there's something inherently undemocratic about it. And it's very prevalent, as you've made the point many, many times. Like, a third of legislators are elected in this way. So, like, you want to get elected, but you also don't want to alienate the people who elect you, and you don't want the voters to hate you. And then once you get elected, are you going to reform the process that got you there? Like everyone was saying last night, they were saying, when you asked, did Chris Hansen do a good job? Unanimous yes. Everyone thought he did a good job because the voters in this district they want to represent all voted for Chris Hansen. And yet when you ask them about the process, everyone is like, well, he maybe made a bad decision. I don't know. He seemed like he was in it for himself. This choice to go take this high-paying job, not so cool. It was just like, there's something wrong here. There's something rotten going on.
This might be one of the last vacancy committees we'll have, right? If there is some reform that ends up happening in 2025, this will be the nail in the coffin of vacancy committees. And it'll be an interesting way to go down.
Well, do you have a prediction? Do you want to pick a winner?
Oh, man, I would say it's probably going to go down to 2 or 3 rounds of voting, right? I don't think it's going to go like 5 or 6 rounds of voting, but anything can happen. The vote's going to happen on January 7th. I think Stephen Woodrow and Sean Camacho will probably be top 2, but I don't think they'll get enough for the majority. Don't know which one's going to edge out. I think they have the longest standing relationships with committee members. Sean just ran a campaign. Woodrow's been running campaigns, so they have those connections there, and they have a track record they can do. After that, it's going to be pretty tight. You can see Iris picking up some significant votes amongst progressives and people who want that type of expertise at the Capitol. Matt's been a known quantity in the district for a little bit now. Monica has too. Shanice comes across as so like heartwarming and likable. And she had a really interesting moment too, where she was talking about like, this almost feels empowering to her being a part of this process. So I would say probably Sean and Woodrow, top 2. After that, Matt, Monica, and Iris. I think Chris and Shanice, I think might will have some support too. I'm not sure what constituents they're looking at exactly. Then it becomes a broker convention. Then it's like, hey, can I get this person's second votes? Can I get this person's third votes? If I had to say, I think maybe Rep. Woodrow ekes it out. I don't know what that says about vacancy committees, but anything could happen. I would not be surprised if any of these people end up winning.
I'm just going to throw a name out there. I don't know if I have a good reason. I guess I was talking to her a little bit afterwards about her strategy, and I liked the way she was thinking about this. Monica Van Buskirk. That's my out of left field prediction.
Okay.
We'll see.
I like it.
We'll see in January.
Yeah, we could do a live show from the corner of the vacancy.
We'll see.
One last thing I was just going to say is, so we had 110 people there last night. About 50 of them were vacancy members, but 50 of them were just CityCast listeners or just citizens of Senate District 31. And I had a really good conversation with 3 young folks who were involved in Senate District 31. And they said, hey, how can I get involved with this? I'm a Democrat. I'm a voter. I care about this, but I'm not a precinct organizer. What can I do? And I told them, and there's one of two ways you can get involved. One, if you really like one of these candidates, go talk to that candidate. They'll tell you who to reach out to in particular for your precinct. The other thing you can do is you can go to the Democrats website. I think it's like denverdemocrats.org. You can find your precinct there. And then after you find your precinct, you can find your House district, contact that House district and be like, hey, give me my PO's email and phone number. And I want to lobby them. I want to call them up and be like, hey, I think you should vote for this person. Or like, hey, don't vote for this.
CC us. CC Denver at citycast.fm.
Yeah, I mean, get really involved. And, people are saying, like, they're trying to open up this process. We're trying to shine a light here. It's a multi-step process where you have to call somebody to call somebody to call somebody. But I think it's worth it.
It's possible. Well, this has been really fun. I'm so glad we did this together, Deep. It was a great debate. Thanks again to everyone who came out last night. Good luck to the candidates, I guess. We'll see in January who comes out on top. We'll be talking about it. Deep Singh Badesha, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed the show, why not take a minute to tell a vacancy committee member for Senate District 31 about us, rate the show wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to our morning newsletter and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See you then.
You know what we didn't mention is that if Woodrow or Camacho get elected, there's going to be another vacancy from their